Hi, I'm Steve from the Rooted Podcast, and I hope you can join me every weekday for a 5-minute or less devotional word study or insight into Scripture to add to your day. Welcome to Fruit Snacks. Hey everyone. In today's word study, I wanted to look at the word spiritual and take a closer look at what it actually means. Now, we've discussed something similar to this concept when we looked at Paul's idea of spiritual bodies and whether or not that meant that they were somehow immaterial, or perhaps if spiritual meant something different than that. And so this is a similar idea, but I think one that we can carry a bit further, because this doesn't just have to do with bodies, but just this whole notion of what it means to be spiritual or to be a spiritual person according to the Bible. Now, if we look at this word on the surface based on how it gets used in our culture and context, just like with this idea of spiritual bodies, it might seem contradictory. We tend to think of spiritual in terms of immaterial or intangible or non-physical. And we know from our study of Paul's use of spiritual bodies and discussion that that's simply not how the Bible uses this term. Spiritual is just as real as physical. It's just a different kind of stuff, if you will. And if we look at several passages, a lot of them are going to be in 1 Corinthians. But if we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 2, like verses 13 and 15, for example, one of the things that we can see is there's a contrast between spiritual wisdom and human wisdom. Well, spiritual here certainly wouldn't mean intangible or non-physical wisdom, because human wisdom wouldn't mean something that's physical that we can measure. Rather, spiritual in this context means from the Spirit, from God Himself, as opposed to from humans. If we look at another passage in 1 Corinthians 12, verse 1, this is the immediate context here is about spiritual gifts. And again, I don't think that if we are introspective about it, we would say that spiritual gifts that we say we have and that we utilize within a church context are somehow not real or not physical gifts. In fact, many spiritual gifts, like hospitality, can be very tangible. And so what does it mean then to have a spiritual gift? Well, it means that these are gifts that don't come, just like wisdom, from us, from humans. They come from the Spirit, from God. So there are more examples that I can give, but I think at this point, we've made the point that when the Bible in the New Testament specifically talks about this idea of something being spiritual, the emphasis and the real meaning here is that it is spiritual because it is associated with God or connected with God in some way. And so when you and I are said to be spiritual does not mean that there's something mystical or intangible about us. Rather, the Bible uses the term to mean that a spiritual person is someone who is connected with the Spirit of God. We are spiritual not because of what we do. We are spiritual because of who we are. Not something that we've done in and of ourselves, but because of our faith in Jesus, we are now connected to the Spirit of God. And it is by virtue of that connection of now who we are as new creatures that we are spiritual. Being spiritual, once again, is not about what you do. It is about who you are. And we live in a culture and in a society that desperately, desperately needs to hear that distinction.